we're ready to take an inward look. We're ready to take the U-turn. What do we do? How do we do this? So at this point, we begin taking our own pulse. So when we turn inward and take our pulse, we begin by paying attention. And so this is contemplative awareness is what we're talking about here. So we're cultivating a non-judgmental, non-reactive awareness of whatever agitation is present within us. And so this is the kind of contemplative awareness we're talking about is if you imagine looking at clouds in the sky and saying, oh, well, that one looks like a train, and then letting it go and it moves on. And the next one, oh, that looks like a leaf, and then it moves on. And you're not really becoming enmeshed with the clouds and caught up in it. You're just kind of noticing them as they float by. Or with my daughter, when she is playing by herself, I'll sometimes watch her play and just become enamored in watching her play and not become caught up in playing with her in that particular moment. And so just the joy of seeing her learn how to be gain more dexterity with her hands or walking around as she continues to grow. And so that kind of contemplative awareness where you're seeing what's going on within you, but you're not becoming charged with the energy of that part. And then after we're spent some time paying attention, then we begin to understand empathically. And so this is listening for and being moved by the suffering hidden within the cry of this part. And so for this, the acronym FLAG is helpful. So there's a fear. So the movement is potentially terrified of an imminent danger, perhaps rejection, ridicule, violation, whatever fear it may have. Then there could be a longing. Maybe it's not fear. Maybe this part has a longing, that the movement yearns for something essential to our own flourishing. So renewal, or perhaps some freedom or love or life. And maybe it's not longing. Maybe this part has an aching wound, that there's pain from the past that still stings and bleeds and is triggered in the present. And so it may have an aching wound, like shame, abuse, abandonment, neglect. And so perhaps it's an aching wound. And if not, maybe there's a gift obstructed, that the movement holds the burgeoning seed of a talent or personal capacity that's been denied or buried, and that is bursting to be claimed and nurtured into flourishing. And so the gift perhaps is a gift of one's own power, or one's tenderness, or one's art. So for me, tenderness is one that was present that took a long time to come to fruition, because I grew up in a context of toxic masculinity, and tenderness is not something that I was allowed to be. I was allowed socially to be angry. That's the primary form of expression that I'm allowed as a male. And so tenderness, which is something that I wanted to be in the world, was denied me. And so the compassion practices really allowed me to realize that gift. So as one example. And so as we tend to these different parts, and we use the FLAG acronym, we'll notice that whenever we hit upon what this part needs, it begins to resonate. We can feel it within. Oh, I feel this way. No wonder I respond or act this way, because this part of me has needed this longing to be fulfilled, or this gift to be expressed in the world. And so something inside of us shifts when we resonate with the part, when we extend that empathic care. And then the next aspect is loving with connection. And so as we're moved by the suffering within, we extend care toward the need or wound that presents itself. And so this is like loving, like imagining picking up your child and holding them and loving them. That kind of loving, all-embracing care is what we're talking about here. And then we move to sensing the sacred. So we recognize and savor the infinite expanse of the sacred source of compassion that holds and heals the suffering within us. And so this is, this can be a tricky one. I think in this context, sacredness is okay, spiritual expansiveness, but I know a lot of you are working with youth, and so youth are kind of turned off by the church today. And so sacredness can have a really negative connotation at worst, or just ambivalent associations. So to really kind of cut to the chase here, being sacred, the worst use of the term sacred can really trigger people. So for my sister, who was born and raised in the church, and then came out as a lesbian in the early 90s. She was shunned by the church, shunned by people that she had grown up with and known all her life. And that this caused a lot of wounds and trauma. And so talking about the sacred for my sister can conjure images of trauma, can re-traumatize her in the worst case scenarios, and abuse and ostracization. And so this is the antithesis of what we're trying to get at here. And so another way that you could go about describing this is to talk about how this relates to like a non-religious setting. So I've studied a number of contemplative traditions since that's kind of my area of expertise. And looking at these different traditions, what I noticed, whether you're looking at Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, that the way these mystics describe their transcendence or movement towards what they define as ultimate, whether it's God, Allah, or the Atman or the Anatman, that this movement is resting in or union with ultimacy is just, they describe this in ways that are eerily similar and in some cases identical to the way astronauts that went to the moon described the way that experience changed their life. And so what I mean here is that mystics talk about meta-awareness. So this increasing sphere of, or increasing awareness of the spheres of reality and the spheres of existence. And so what I finally put together is that astronauts physically experienced meta-awareness in viewing the world from a third-person perspective, especially being on the moon and looking back at the Earth. That it was this kind of third-person perspective that gave them a meta-awareness of the Earth and how fundamentally interconnected all of life is on Earth, because it's all right there on the planet, and they were able to see it from the outside for the first time in human history. And none of these men were committed to contemplation. Many of them were not very religious. They were certainly not going to the moon looking for spiritual insight. But many of them, as a result of that experience, fundamentally changed the way they understand reality and the way they understand themselves. And now they're more committed to talking about the interconnectedness of life, the interconnectedness of our ecosystems and our justice systems, our food production, and the way all of this impacts how we live on Earth. This is what we're talking about with sensing the sacredness, with sensing that spiritual expansiveness. This is why we don't like the bridge metaphors, because it reifies the illusion that we're separate when we're fundamentally interconnected as human beings. We all exist as within the image of God, within a theological context. And so when we sense the sacredness, then we move to embodying new life, that we notice the gifts and qualities of restored humanity that are being birthed within us. And so Chris mentioned shame. And so this, for me, is a powerful motivation for anti-racism. And that sounds paradoxical. But shame, when I take the time to pulse for myself, and around the shame that I feel when engaging issues of race and racism, what I realize is that studying the history of racism, particularly in the United States, and the history of human degradation, violence, carnage, and utter barbarity on the part of whites makes me angry. When I connect that to the fact that I'm a white man and I benefit from that history of dehumanization, I feel shame. Shame is the appropriate emotional response to that realization that I'm intimately connected to the history of racism and I benefit from it. And when I pulse for myself, what I understand that shame to be telling me is no more. I refuse to be a part of this process, and I will do whatever I can to not be a part of that process. And when I pulse for myself, whatever I can do is practice anti-racism. When I don't pulse for myself and I get enmeshed with that shame, whatever I can do is practice racism. It plays out in very racist ways where I try and center my white experience and try and shut down people of color. And shut down their experiences and voices and that sort of thing. But when I pulse for myself, I understand that I'm being called to something deeper. I'm being called to practice anti-racism. And so pulsing for ourselves is a key part of understanding the parts within us and what they're yearning for and what the wisdom within them is trying to bring to our lives.